Welcome back to the Mid Podcast, the show where hot takes make minimum effort and somehow, against the odds of imperial bureaucracy and Disney release schedules, it still works. I'm your host, broadcasting live from somewhere between a respectable media analysis and a swap meet. Today, we are talking about something that feels both inevitable and mildly threatening to my emotional stability: the Mandalorian and Grogu. That's right. Mando and his tiny green Chaos Goblin have officially left the comfort of streaming and entered the dangerous wilderness known as the movie theaters. And honestly, kind of feels appropriate. Because if Grogu can survive bounty hunters, stormtroopers, they do miss a lot, pirate kings, imperial warlords, dark troopers, giant monsters, and the emotional commitment issues of Mandalorians, well, he can probably survive a theater where somebody is opening a family-sized bag of peanut M&Ms during the quiet dialogue scenes. Now, before we jump into the movie itself, we need to do something important. We need to talk about how we got to the movie. And I don't mean getting in my car and driving. Because if you walked into The Mandalorian and Grogu without watching the show, first of all, bold choice. Second, you would be confused faster than a stormtrooper at a target range. So today we're going to do a quick but detailed trip through the galaxy where we're visiting the rise of Mando and the phenomenal Baby Yoda. Grogu. Still possibly the greatest marketing ambush in modern entertainment history. And then we'll dive deep into the film itself. What worked? What didn't? What made me cheer? What made me laugh? And whether this thing actually deserves the jump from Disney Plus to the big screen. So buckle up, charge that jetpack, hide your snacks from Grogu, and remember, this is the way. So let's travel back to 2019. Ancient history, I know. A simpler era. The world had not yet become obsessed with sourdough bread and Zoom backgrounds. And Disney Plus launched with one gigantic question: can Star Wars survive television? Now, to be fair, Star Wars had already tried TV. Sometimes successfully, sometimes, well, let's just say there are Clone War fans, and there are people who still remember the holiday special, like war veterans remembering combat. But then came along The Mandalorian, and suddenly Star Wars felt different. Smaller, dirtier, more personal, less galactic Senate committee hearing, and more space westering where rent is overdue. And honestly, that is exactly what the franchise needed: more space western. Well, in season 1, we see space western meets foster parenting? What the hell? Season 1 introduces us to Mando. He's a bounty hunter. He's Hamilton, professional, emotionally unavailable, basically the galaxy's most dangerous Uber driver. Mando operates in the Outer Rim, taking jobs for the Bounty Hunters Guild. Life is simple. Brings in targets, gets paid. He don't ask questions. He has no emotional attachment. And then everything changes because Mando receives a mysterious contract. Track down a 50-year-old target? Sounds sinister. Could be a crime lord. Could be a Sith cultist. Could be somebody with unpaid parking tickets. Instead, he finds Grogu. And the internet collectively lost its mind. Now remember, Disney had hidden Grogu from marketing. No trailers, no toys, no leaks, which meant audiences encountered this tiny green creature in real time and immediately forgot every character's actual name. Mando? Who? Pedro Pascal? Irrelevant. The galaxy had one identity now: Baby Yoda! And Grogu becomes the emotional center of the show. Mando's mission is simple: deliver the child. But then he realizes Imperial remnants want him. And suddenly, our bounty hunter develops something he hasn't in years: a conscience. This becomes this season's core. No giant space politics, not chosen one mythology. Fatherhood? Reluctant fatherhood? The kind where a man says, I'm not raising this child. And 10 episodes later, he is committing felony assaults for juice boxes? Mando rescues Grogu from Imperial scientist Dr. Perishing and a former Imperial officer, Moff Gideon. Okay, now, I kind of liked Moff, even though he was a bad guy. Just saying. I think it had a lot to do with the casting of Moff, because that was a great casting. And Gideon, fantastic villain, because he wasn't cartoonishly evil. He was calm, collected, terrifyingly competent, which in Star Wars is honestly refreshing. Most villains scream. Gideon looks like he is already read your obituary. Season 1 ends with two major developments. Mando adopts Grogu. Gideon reveals the dark saber, which everybody wanted. And because suddenly this wasn't just a Western, it was Mandalorian history. So why did season 1 work? Well, it landed because it remembered something Star Wars occasionally forgets: scale matters. Sometimes smaller stories feel bigger. The show traded galaxy-wide apocalypse for personal stakes. Protect the kid, survive the mission, trust carefully, and visually, phenomenal. The volume technology changed television production. Worlds looked cinematic. Dusty planets felt lived in. The katinas looked dangerous again. And the music was an absolute masterpiece, instead of recycling classic themes endlessly, which, I mean, okay. The Vader March is like the best. It created something fresh. That recorded theme, you hear it once and suddenly you want to buy a jetpack and make poor financial decisions. Well, then came season 2. And friends, season 2 said, what if we keep the emotional storytelling and then add every Star Wars character we can legally find? Season 2 was fan service, but it worked emotionally. And we start out with Mando searching for Jedi, which is already funny because Mando barely understands Jedi. He treats them like people treat Bigfoot. Apparently they exist. Somebody may have saw one near Arizona. And this journey expands the universe. And then we meet Bo-Katan and Boba Fett. And then the moment we meet, and I'm probably going to butcher the name, so don't kill me, Ahsoka Tano. Now this matters a lot, because Ahsoka had become one of Star Wars' most beloved characters through animation. Bringing her into live action carried some serious expectations. And thankfully, it worked. Rosario Dawson delivered a calm, battle-worn Ahsoka who feels wise but still dangerous. And she reveals something massive. The child has a name. No, it wasn't Baby Yoda. Although, occasionally I still do call him Baby Yoda. Not Tiny Force Goblin. Although that would have been a great name. Not Space Gremlin. but Grogu. And Grogu has trauma. He survived Order 66. He remembers the Jedi Temple. Suddenly, the adorable mascot becomes something deeper. A survivor. And that's when the series matures emotionally. And because Mando and Grogu are no longer cute companions, they're damaged people finding a family. And then Disney dropped the nuclear option. And by nuclear option, I do not mean we're going to stand in Congress and talk all night. They dropped their nuclear option of one Luke Skywalker. And we'll stop because, trust me, Luke, Dark Troopers, Boba Fett chaos, Season 3 politics, The Mandalorian and Grogu deserve some time to breathe. Alrighty. So, Mando is doing what every exhausted parent eventually does, looking for somebody more qualified to watch Grogu. Which brings us to our Season 2 finale. Now, before we see Luke Skywalker arrive, we need to appreciate how tense the episode was. Because Moff Gideon, great villain, he became a problem. Not a mild inconvenience problem, not forgotten my Disney password problem. Oh no, homeboy, he became a legitimate nightmare. He captures Grogu, and Mando assembles what can only be described as the galaxy's strangest workplace team building exercise. You got it. Which sounds less like a strike team and more like the guest list for the world's most dangerous wedding reception. Their mission? Rescue Grogu. Defeat Gideon. Do not argue about Mandalorian politics. And guess what? The last one never works. Then we meet the Dark Troopers. Now, I love Stormtroopers, but let's be honest, Stormtroopers are less military force and more motivational background dancers. No, Dark Troopers, different story. Those things are terrifying. No personality, no fear, no dialogue, just armored murder refrigerators. And for a moment, it genuinely feels hopeless. We have heroes trapped, troopers are breaking through, Mando's standing there wondering if maybe retirement on a quiet moon suddenly sounds fantastic. And then one X-Wing appears. Just one. Which in Star Wars history means one of two things. Either help has arrived, or somebody important is about to ruin everybody's afternoon. And suddenly, the green lightsaber, the black cloak, the single glove, and every grown Star Wars fan transformed into a 12-year-old again. Now look, some people criticize nostalgia. Fair enough. Hollywood sometimes treats nostalgia like barbecue sauce. They just pour it on everything, whether it belongs or not. But this worked because Luke isn't there for applause. He's there for a story. He destroys the Dark Troopers with terrifying ease. And honestly, the scene quietly reminds the audience something important. Luke Skywalker at this point is not a struggling farm boy. He's a legend. He's the nightmare Imperial officers tell each other about. And then comes the emotional hit. Grogu must leave. Mando removes his helmet. And that moment matters because Mandalorians treat helmets almost like sacred identity. Mando exposing his face means vulnerability, trust, love. Pedro Pascal barely says anything, but the performance lands. And suddenly Star Wars fans are crying over a man saying goodbye to a puppet. Yes, cinema is strange, beautiful, but strange. Well, we move to the book of Boba Fett, which secretly become Mando Season 2.5, which is this is where things got weird, because after Season 2 ended, people presumed, okay, Season 3 next. Reasonable assumption. Logical even. Disney, however, looked at logic and said, no thank you. Instead, we got the book of Boba Fett, which began as Boba Fett's crime lord story? Interesting premises. Legendary bounty hunter takes over Jabba's empire. Could be gritty. Political, dangerous, and then halfway through, the show suddenly remembers Mando exists. And honestly, the tonal shift was so dramatic it felt like accidentally changing television channels. 1 minute, organized crime. The next minute, Mando's back. Mando's back. Mando returns. He has a new ship, the N1 Starfighter, which, by the way, gorgeous, fast, classic, and about as practical for cargo transport as a skateboard. But it looks cool, and Star Wars has survived decades on that principle alone. And then the bombshell. Mando reunites with Grogu. Now, this created debate because emotionally, sweet, adorable, wonderful, but narratively, some fans felt Luke and Grogu season 2 goodbye got speed run. It's like spending months preparing for your child to leave for college, and then they come back by Thursday because the dorm food was suspicious. Still, the reunion works because the chemistry works. Mando and Grogu are Star Wars comfort food. They're space peanut butter and jelly. And suddenly, we finally get season 3. So we get Mandalore, politics, and helmet theology. Season 3 is fascinating and divisive, mostly because the show changes, and it changes big time. The first 2 seasons were intimate, simple, quest-driven. Season 3 says, what if we add government? Which, historically, is when the audiences get nervous. Now Mando's story becomes tied to Mandalore itself, the ruined homeworld. And this shifts focus toward culture, identity, tradition, what it means to be a Mandalorian. And honestly, I kind of appreciate this as a historian because Mandalorians, well, they are a little weird, let's just be honest. Their entire civilization is basically cool armor, emotional repression, and 47 arguments about helmet etiquette. And suddenly we have competing ideologies. So Bo-Katan believes Mandalore needs unity. The Children of the Watch remain deeply traditional. Mando exists somewhere between both worlds, which mirrors real cultural tension. How do societies preserve identity while adapting? Heavy stuff. For a show featuring jetpacks and flamethrowers, and then we get Moff Gideon's cloning operation. Now, Gideon remains terrific, but he understands power. And he doesn't merely want military control, he wants legacy, perfection. His cloning ambitions connect to larger Star Wars questions about Imperial obsession and artificial power. And yes, there are moments where season 3 feels crowded. More mythology, more politics, more lore. And sometimes the pacing resembles trying to read 3 Wikipedia tabs simultaneously. But the finale worked. Bo-Katan leads, Mandalore rises, Gideon falls, and Mando, he changes. He's no longer wondering. He's no longer merely surviving. He chooses family. He chooses home. And that matters. Because now, for the first time, Mando and Grogu, they have some purpose. Which brings us finally to the movie. And folks, Star Wars returned to the theaters carrying expectations heavier than the Beskar armor. So, did this need to be a movie? That's the first question. Because let's be honest, Hollywood sometimes treats theatrical releases like old gym memberships. Maybe this will solve our problems. Streaming made Mando famous. Television built the audience. So moving to film, risky, but surprisingly, the movie understood that. Right away, the scale feels different. It's bigger, cleaner, more cinematic, but importantly, not disconnected. it still feels like Mandalorian storytelling. The opening alone establishes that Mando and Grogu operate in the New Republic territory, taking assignments involving Imperial remnants and criminal factions. And immediately the film understands its greatest strength, their relationship. Because no matter how large the explosions get, the story lives or dies with these two characters. A tired dad and his magical toddler with questionable ethics. And Grogu steals scenes every single time. There's something hilarious about watching hardened warriors negotiate diplomacy while Grogu quietly commits snack theft in the background. The movie wisely leans into that. Not excessively, not gimmicky, but naturally. Because Grogu's humor works best when treated casually. He isn't the punchline mascot, he's chaos occurring organically. And Mando remains compelling because he's fundamentally practical. He doesn't give speeches, he gives solutions, usually explosive ones. And the film plays with that wonderfully. One scene, especially, without spoiling specifics, involves Mando navigating New Republic bureaucracy, which is comedy gold, because after surviving Imperial warlords, paperwork nearly defeats him. That's realism. That's cinema. Visually, oh my god, did this thing look expensive in the best way. The planets feel larger, action feels more kinetic, space battles finally have breathing room, and the sound design, fantastic. Jetpacks, blaster fire, everything lands with theatrical weight. The movie knows audience paid for a spectacle, and it delivers. But this is important. Spectacle alone never saves Star Wars. We'll talk about whether the story itself reaches hyperspace or stalls out over Tatooine. So, let's get into it. Alrighty, we've covered the journey. We've survived Mandalorian theology. We've watched Disney accidentally hide important plot points inside the book of Boba Fett, like Easter eggs designed by chaotic engineers. Now, let's talk about the movie itself. Because spectacle is nice, pretty visuals are nice, but Star Wars has taught us something important over the years. You can have giant fleets, laser battles, and enough CGI to power a small nation, and still end up with a story flatter than a moisture farmer social calendar. So, does The Mandalorian and Grogu actually work? Mostly, yes. And the reasoning is surprisingly simple. The movie remembers that Mando is not a superhero. He's competent, skilled, dangerous, but he is still vulnerable. And that matters. Because modern franchise storytelling sometimes struggle with power scaling. Everybody becomes unstoppable, everybody gets universe ending stakes. Eventually, characters stop feeling human. Mando avoids that trap. He gets hurt, makes mistakes, even improvises, and frequently survives through stubbornness and luck, which honestly makes him feel more relatable than half the galaxy. Pedro Pascal continues doing remarkable work through voice and physicality. Think about that. This man spends most of the franchise covered from head to toe in armor and still communicates exhaustion, affection, frustration, and dry humor. That's difficult acting. Meanwhile, Grogu evolves in interesting ways, and this is where the movie succeeds better than some people expected. Because Grogu is no longer merely just cute, he has agency, force abilities, decision making power, and thankfully, the film avoids turning him into Baby Yoda, tiny Jedi murder machine. That would have been easy. Instead, Grogu feels like a child learning responsibility. Still impulsive, still adorable, still one frog away from criminal charges, but growing. And their relationship remains the heart. That's the secret sauce. The film understands audiences are not merely watching missions, they're watching family. And weird family at that. A helmeted bounty hunter, a green force sensitive child, and enough emotional baggage to fill 3 cargo freighters. Well, let's talk about the action, because Star Wars action sometimes falls into one of 2 categories. Category 1: elegant, tense, character driven. Think Empire Strikes Back. Category 2: everybody flips for 40 minutes and the laws of gravity file a formal complaint. This movie leans closer to Category 1, mostly. And I appreciate that. The combat feels grounded, for Star Wars anyway, which, admittedly, is like calling lava moderately warm. Mando fights like somebody trained for survival. Efficient, direct, no unnecessary posing, no superhero landing every 7 seconds, and the jetpack sequences, they're fantastic. That's where theatrical scale genuinely helps. The aerial movement feels bigger than television. It's faster, more dangerous, and space combat gets real attention too, which matters because Star Wars ships should feel thrilling. They should feel fast, risky, and mildly irresponsible, like driving a classic muscle car held together by optimism. The movie nails that sensation. Now, humor. This is where modern Star Wars sometimes struggles. There's a difference between wit and interruption. Marvel style joke pacing occasionally sneaks into franchises like an uninvited cousin at Thanksgiving. Thankfully, The Mandalorian and Grogu mostly avoids that. The humor feels character based, which is crucial. Grogu creates comedy naturally. Mando's dry responses create comedy naturally. The awkward situations create comedy naturally. You're getting the picture. Everything here comes naturally. That's better than forcing punchlines. And there are some genuine funny moments involving New Republic officials, which honestly deserve their own sitcom. Because nothing says victorious democracy quite like losing paperwork in space. I'm convinced somewhere in the galaxy there's an interstellar DMV where souls go to suffer. And Mando wandering through administrative chaos. Beautiful. No Sith Lord, no super weapon, just bureaucracy. The true final boss. Well, let's talk about the dangerous word fan service. Because this conversation gets weird fast. Say fan service online, and suddenly people behave like senators debating tax reform. One side says everything nostalgic is manipulation. The other says, if I don't see 6 cameos and a lightsaber duel, this movie insulted my bloodline. Personally, I think fan service is neither automatically good nor automatically bad, but it depends on purpose. Does it deepen story? Or merely point at familiar things like Leonardo DiCaprio pointing at the television? And this movie, for the most part, gets that balance right. There are references, connections, callbacks, but they usually feel earned because this world has history. People know each other. Events matter. That's not fan service, that's continuality. Now, there are moments designed to make audiences clap. Absolutely. Honestly, sometimes that's okay. Cinema can be joyful. Not every emotional response requires academic suspicion. Sometimes people cheer because they're having fun. Wild concept, I know. The trick is moderation, and the movie largely avoids becoming cameo roulette. It remembers Mando and Grogu are the focus, which keeps the narrative grounded. And frankly, that restraint deserves praise. Because Star Wars occasionally treats cameos like seasoning, then dumps it in the whole container. Did this actually need to be a movie? And it's complicated. Because part of me says no. The Mandalorian already worked beautifully on television. Streaming gave it room, breathing space, episode structure, character focus, and some sections of the story absolutely could have functioned as season 4. No question. But there's the other side. The theatrical experience changes things. The scale changes, the sound changes, the emotion changes, and watching Mando and Grogu on a giant screen feels different. More methodic, more immersive. And Star Wars historically belongs to communal viewing. People reacting together, laughing together, cheering together. That matters. Franchises survive through shared experience, and the movie taps into that feeling. So maybe the better question isn't, did this need to be a movie? Maybe the question should be, did it justify becoming one? And I'd argue mostly yes. Not perfectly, but successfully, because it feels cinematic without abandoning its identity. And honestly, that's harder than people think. Some franchises grow bigger and lose themselves. Marvel. This one mostly remembers who it is: a Western, a family story, a tale about belonging, just with more jetpacks. So, where do I land? The Mandalorian and Grogu? No, it's not perfect. Let's be clear. Some pacing wobbles existed, some story beats felt streamlined, and if you skipped the series, good luck. You'll spend half the runtime whispering, wait, when did that happen? But the film succeeds where it matters. Mando and Grogu remain compelling. The visuals impressed, the action entertains, the emotional core survives, and perhaps most importantly, the movie remembers Star Wars should feel adventurous, hopeful, a little weird, and occasionally ridiculous. Because this is a franchise where laser swords and space monks coexist with giant slug gangsters and emotionally unstable robots. Absurdity? Well, it's part of the charm. So, my final ranking: 4 helmets out of 5. It was strong, it was entertaining, definitely worth seeing, and proof that Star Wars still has stories worth telling when it remembers characters matter more than spectacle. Now, if you will excuse me, I'm going to spend the rest of the evening wondering how Grogu still hasn't been banned from restaurants across the galaxy. Excuse me. So, I want to thank you for joining me here on the Mid Podcast, where, as I say, my takes are hot, the effort is aggressively average, and somehow I still make the jump to hyperspace. And until next time, I need you to keep your helmets on, protect your snacks, and may the force be with you and your streaming password. Till next time.